Most people who track their HRV stare at the number every morning without really knowing how to move it. They know that higher is generally better, they know that stress brings it down, and they know that sleep matters. But beyond those vague ideas, the path to actually improving HRV in a meaningful, measurable way is surprisingly unclear. So I decided to run a 14-day experiment on myself with a specific set of tools and interventions and track what happened day by day. Before I get into what I did and what changed, it's worth spending a moment on why HRV responds to interventions at all, because understanding the mechanism makes the whole experiment make a lot more sense. So, HRV is a window into your autonomic nervous system, specifically the balance between your sympathetic and your parasympathetic branches. Now, your sympathetic nervous system is your accelerator. It responds to stress, to threat, and demand by speeding the heart up and preparing the body for action. Your parasympathetic nervous system, that's your brake. It promotes recovery, digestion, and rest, and it slows the heart down. Now, HRV reflects how fluidly your heart shifts between these two influences. A heart that is highly responsive, capable of speeding up and slowing down in tight coordination with your nervous system, produces high variability. A heart that is locked into a rigid, unresponsive rhythm produces low variability. Now, the specific nerve that drives the parasympathetic influence on your heart is called the vagus nerve. It runs from your brainstem down through your neck and into your chest and abdomen. And it's the primary conduit for what is called vagal tone. Now, higher vagal tone is strongly associated with higher HRV. This is important because vagal tone isn't fixed. It responds to your behavior, your breathing patterns, your sleep quality, and even targeted stimulation. So that's exactly what this 14-day experiment was designed to exploit. Now, for measurement, I used the HRV4 training app, which is around $10 as a one-time purchase. What makes it practical is that it doesn't require a chest strap or a wearable sensor. It uses your phone camera to detect subtle color changes in your fingertip caused by blood flow. It's a technique called photoplethysmography, and from that it extracts your RMSSD, which is the root mean square of successive differences between heartbeats. RMSSD is the gold standard for day-to-day HRV tracking because it's particularly sensitive to vagal activity, and it produces comparable results even across short measurement windows of around 2 to 3 minutes. Every morning before getting out of bed, I took a resting measurement in the same position at the same time with the same breathing pattern. Quiet, natural breathing. Having a consistent baseline measurement protocol is genuinely non-negotiable. HRV is sensitive enough that a cup of coffee before measuring, a slightly different time of day, or even measuring while sitting versus lying down can shift your number significantly. The intervention itself would be meaningless noise without measurement discipline. Now, the interventions. I organized them into 3 categories: breathwork, behavioral changes to sleep and morning routine, and device-based vagus nerve stimulation. Breathwork was the cornerstone of the experiment, and for good reason. There's a well-established mechanism connecting breathing to HRV called respiratory sinus arrhythmia. When you inhale, your heart rate speeds up slightly. When you exhale, it slows down. This natural fluctuation is one of the primary contributors to beat-to-beat variability, and you can amplify it deliberately by controlling the pacing of your breath. The most evidence-backed breathing frequency for maximizing HRV is around 1/10 of a hertz, that's 0.1 hertz, which corresponds to roughly 6 breath cycles per minute. This is often called resonance breathing or coherence breathing, and it involves inhaling for about 5 seconds and exhaling for about 5 seconds. Every evening, about an hour before bed, I practice 10 minutes of resonance breathing using a free app called Paced Breathing, which lets you set a custom breath rate and follows you with a visual pacer. The research on this is fairly consistent. Regular resonance breathing practice tends to shift autonomic baseline towards higher parasympathetic tone over time, not just during the session itself. I also used a shorter technique in the mornings when I felt acutely stressed, which is the physiological sigh. This involves a double inhale through the nose, followed by a long, slow exhale through the mouth. It's one of the fastest known methods to acutely downregulate the sympathetic nervous system, and even a handful of cycles can noticeably shift your state within about 30 seconds. Now, the second category was sleep and behavioral hygiene. HRV is profoundly sensitive to sleep quality, and specifically to how much slow wave and REM sleep you're getting. For the 14 days, I imposed a consistent sleep and wake time within about 20 minutes each day, regardless of when I fell asleep. I also moved my last meal at least 3 hours before bed. I cut alcohol entirely, and I reduced screen brightness significantly in that final hour before sleep. Now, none of these are revolutionary ideas, but the combination of them consistently applied is something that most people underestimate. Sleep fragmentation, late eating, and alcohol are each independently associated with reduced overnight HRV, likely because they all interfere with the depth of parasympathetic recovery that happens during sleep. The third category is where things got more specific. The device I used is called the Pulsetto, which is a vagus nerve stimulator that sits on the sides of your neck, and it delivers low-level electrical pulses to the vagus nerve transcutaneously, meaning through the skin. Transcutaneous vagus nerve stimulation, which is also called TVNS, has been studied in clinical settings primarily for conditions like epilepsy and depression, but there's a growing body of research examining its effect on heart rate variability and autonomic tone in healthy populations. The proposed mechanism is direct. Stimulating the vagus nerve activates the parasympathetic system, which, over repeated sessions, shifts the autonomic balance toward higher baseline vagal tone. The Pulsetto connects to an app on your phone where you can select session intensity and duration. Now, I used it twice a day for 20 minutes total, typically in the early evening, during the same window as my breathwork session, as well as right before sleep. The combination of breathwork and vagus nerve stimulation was intentional. They're both activating the same pathway, but from different directions, one through the respiratory mechanics and one through direct electrical input. All right, whether the combination produces a synergistic effect is something the research hasn't fully settled, but the logic is sound and both interventions are individually supported. Now, what actually happened over the 14 days? The first 3 days showed essentially no change. Now, this is normal and it's expected, and it's worth saying clearly, HRV doesn't respond to a single session of anything. It reflects accumulated autonomic state, and it takes a few days of consistent intervention before any signals begin to emerge from the noise. My baseline at the start of the experiment sat at an RMSSD of around 38 milliseconds. By days 4 through 6, I noticed a slight upward trend with values ranging from 41 to 44. Interestingly, the days where my sleep was most consistent tracked with the highest values. One night where I slept about 90 minutes less than usual, that pulled my reading back to 36, which was a useful reminder that sleep disruption can single-handedly override other positive interventions. From days 7 through 10, the trend became more consistent. Values were clustering in the 44 to 49 range, with fewer sharp drops. My subjective sense of morning readiness also improved noticeably during this window. I felt less sluggish in the mornings, and my focus during work, it settled faster. Now, these are soft signals, but they are consistent with what you'd expect from a nervous system that's recovering overnight more efficiently. Now, the final 4 days were the most interesting. By day 11, I recorded an RMSSD of 52, which was meaningfully above my pre-experiment baseline. Days 12 through 14 held in the 50 to 54 range, suggesting a genuine shift in baseline rather than a random fluctuation. By the end of the 14 days, my average RMSSD was approximately 47, compared to roughly 37 at the start. Now, that's a 27% increase. Now, there are some important caveats here. This is a self-experiment, not a controlled trial. So I can't isolate which intervention drove the most improvement because I implemented all of them simultaneously. The sleep changes alone could account for a significant portion of the effect. The breathwork has solid mechanistic backing. Talking about pulsato vagus nerve stimulator, I noticed my results became more consistent in the second week, once I was more familiar with the device and more disciplined about my session timing. That suggests that consistency and proper use may play an important role. Now, what I can say with reasonable confidence is that the combination of consistent measurement protocol, resonance breathing practice, sleep hygiene changes, and daily vagus nerve stimulation produced a meaningful and sustained increase in my HRV over the 14 days. None of the individual pieces are complicated or particularly expensive. The HRV4 training app is about $10. The Breathwork apps are free. The Pulsato is a cost, but it's the only paid device in the stack, and it's the component that adds a direct physiological input that you can't replicate with behavior alone. Now, if you want to replicate this experiment, the most important thing is the measurement discipline. Lock in your protocol before you change anything else. Measure at the same time, in the same position, with the same breathing pattern every single morning. Without that foundation, you're essentially flying blind. Then, layer in the interventions one at a time if you want to isolate effects, or all at once if you just want to move the number. Now, HRV, it's not a perfect metric. It doesn't tell you everything about your health, but as a daily signal of how well your autonomic nervous system is recovering from the demands that you're placing on it, it is one of the most actionable numbers available to anybody with a smartphone. And as it turns out, it is more movable than most people think. Now listen, if this video helped you learn even a little bit about HRV and the parasympathetic nervous system, please go ahead and hit subscribe so that you can keep learning and supporting your health journey.